Warner? I totally forgot you go here.
What are you talking about? I'm sorry, are you here to see me?
No, silly. I go here.
You got into Harvard Law?
What, like it's hard?
Welcome to the Graveyard Slot, where we talk about movies past their prime time.
Here, we revisit old favorites with a fresh perspective to see if they deserve more credit or if they should stay buried. I'm Sohini.
And I'm Sarah, and today we're talking about Legally Blonde. Before we begin, we'd like to encourage anyone who might be listening to donate to Focus Congo, a non-profit organization working to provide aid for the millions of internally displaced people in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Focus Congo operates across multiple areas, including education, medical relief, hunger and disaster relief, and performing arts. You can read more about their work and contribute to their efforts on their website, focuscongo.com.
This week, we're talking about Legally Blonde. This movie follows Elle, a bubbly, kind, and optimistic sorority president who has her world turned upside down when her boyfriend Warner dumps her on the night she expected him to propose. In an effort to win him back, she enrolls at Harvard Law, where Warner is studying, and where Elle might just not be able to afford to be bubbly, kind, or optimistic. This movie was released in 2001. It was directed by Robert Luketic, who is a TV and movie director known for 21, The Ugly Truth, and Killer, and Legally Blonde was his feature directorial debut. It was written by Karen McCullough and Kristen Smith, who are screenwriter partners who worked on 10 Things I Hate About You, Ella Enchanted, The House Bunny, The Ugly Truth, and She's the Man.
So, Legally Blonde has quite a high rating of 71% on Rotten Tomatoes, and it has become a well-loved classic over time. Disregarding that, though, it's exactly the kind of movie we've previously discussed on this podcast. Other examples come to mind like Bratz and several of the Barbie movies, stories that are unapologetically catered towards a female, sometimes young, target audience. As we've seen, these other movies have plenty of overlooked merit, maybe even just as much as Legally Blonde, but it's this movie that has cemented a place for itself among critics and the general audience. So in this episode, I think it'll be interesting to explore what makes it so popular, whether it's the movie's inherent merit or whether it's just easily palatable.
I'm actually surprised by the 71% rating. Like, I would have expected it to be much higher.
Really?
Yeah, like it's so well regarded by the general public.
True.
Although, looking back on critic reviews at the time, apparently it wasn't as well liked, by critics at least, as I would have assumed.
Where I was looking, everyone was pretty much gushing. Well, gushing less over the movie and more over Reese Witherspoon, to be fair.
That's the thing. All the reviews I could find were just saying, oh, Reese Witherspoon elevated this blah movie, was basically the gist of it.
Even the positive reviews that I read, I mean, the ones that didn't mention Reese Witherspoon, the other ones, it seemed like they were complimenting the movie, but not really complimenting it. Like, the general consensus that I could sense is like, oh, this is just a fun, fluffy, silly little watch. Like, nothing that's gonna challenge your brain. That was specifically the opinion of this one review that I wanted to bring up from BBC, which said, funny, enjoyable, and above all, relaxing. You won't need much brain power, but you'll certainly have fun. And it seemed like the overarching opinion seemed to be that this movie doesn't really have that much substance. Like, it's just a good time. And, you know, one of those inoffensive sort of, I hate to say it, but chick flicks. I mean, again, it's interesting to me because we've also seen other movies that have been seen in a similar fashion, but they've been less loved by audiences and critics. So again, I'm just really curious to try and see what it is about this movie that people love so much.
My thing with all of those takes is that while I don't think that it doesn't have substance, it also really underestimates the skill in writing an enjoyable movie. It's not like a low effort, like creation or whatever. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not mindless, I guess is what I'm saying. It's not the same thing. But yeah, I couldn't really find anything that's super interesting, but this review is from Slate and it reads, I half admire its exquisite balancing act, squeezing laughs out of its leading lady's wardrobe vocabulary, gestures, and credulously oblivious Beverly Hills sense of entitlement, while simultaneously demonstrating her brilliance, sturdy ethics, and unflappable egalitarianism. But yeah, even this review is like kind of complimentary, but not really. Like, I half admire.
Yeah, what's the with the half admire?
Anyway, it's all like that. To the point where I'm like, just commit. Just be a hater.
Are you missing the haters who completely missed the point?
I mean, honestly, the apathy is also making me mad. So, well, with that lukewarm reception from the critics in 2001, let's jump into this movie. We will be discussing this chronologically, as always, and we start with a montage of Elle getting ready and this card making its way through the campus grounds to her door.
The opening scene immediately reminds me of movies that we've seen recently, like Bratz, which I already mentioned earlier on. It's just so pink and sparkly and just like those movies, I love how for this one also it sets such a distinct tone, and I especially like the font that they use because I think it's not a font at all. I think it's actual handwriting, and I like the quality that it gives the movie. Like, the name of the movie appears as if it's being written out, and it almost feels like the movie's written to us, like this card has been written for Elle.
Aww.
I like it.
I love it too. I love this introduction to Elle's world. It allows for a clear contrast between this world, where she comes from, and that of Harvard, which we'll see her enter later. A world where she belongs and one where she supposedly doesn't. Because we do see her place in it, and the way she and people like her, whether it be appearance-wise or status, are treated by this community in this opening sequence. And even the shots of Elle getting ready, we see these traits that this world sees as of value. Perhaps even these expected tenets of femininity in this world that Elle possesses and earns her a certain status. And we see the people around Elle at her sorority exemplify these values too, as we follow the letter making its way through the sorority's mansion all the way to Elle's door. Elle is just a particularly exemplary participant of this whole thing.
Yeah, you're right. And I love how rich a world they create, that even through this just one scene, we learn so much about Elle without even hearing one line of dialogue from her. Her interests, her preferred aesthetic, and most importantly, her support system, which does so much for her characterization and, helps us immediately get invested and also believe in what she thinks and what she does going forward.
It kind of engulfs us in that perspective.
I have to say, this is a nothing comment, but I love how big her name is written on the envelope. And it's just staring us in the face the whole time. It just says Elle.
But Elle and her friends think Warner is about to propose, so they go shopping, and a saleswoman tries to sell her a sale item at full price by lying about its features. As iconic a scene as ever, but this is where we see for the first time her intellect and mastery of her field. So that does a good job of establishing her character.
I love the scene as a way to tell us more about Elle's character, and not just her intelligence, but also the fact that she has the capability of becoming an expert or becoming really knowledgeable in the field that she's interested in. Because the way that she wields her knowledge in this scene is very reminiscent of the climax of the movie, where she, again, uses her knowledge of beauty to get a confession out of the culprit. And I really like that they set this up so early in the movie and then it comes back full circle. And I mean, it's a great iconic scene.
You're right. You're so right. I didn't even think about that. She specifically has this debate skills.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's so satisfying, I think, not just because it sets her up as a, quote, real person who is not just pretty, she's also smart. It's, I think, the way that she uses her knowledge and logic and basically tricks the saleswoman into admitting that she knows nothing about what she's talking about. So I think that's what makes it especially satisfying.
Yeah, totally. But Elle picks a dress and Warner takes her out to dinner.
When she walks down the stairs and Warner tells her she looks beautiful, she says, "So do you." And I love that so much.
I love that too, actually. Genuinely.
It's just already so free of, or well, the character and the people that surround her mostly are already so free of, any toxicity and especially like toxic masculinity or any of the, I guess, for lack of a better word, cattiness that we usually see portrayed between women. And it's such a refreshing change of pace.
Yeah, it is really nice. But Warner breaks up with her instead of proposing. And this is our first introduction to this Jackie versus Marilyn binary, or maybe archetype. The roles and labels women are relegated to, and more specifically, women who excel at their own fields and are exemplary figures or paragons or ideal models of their assigned or perceived places in society, and either have their own attached implications when it comes to values that they hold, respect, and socioeconomic backgrounds. And the binary implies this one-dimensional take on women as people without inner lives or nuance when reaching and or surpassing the peak of their supposed abilities or success. These are not people afforded the same complex desires that Warner may possess, where he is able to be this guy who can fuck around at CULA and reach the top of the social hierarchy in a community like Elle's, the West Coast laid back whatever, but is also perfectly capable of crossing that cultural divide and be accepted as part of the East Coast old money Ivy League circle. Women are simply set dressing in either world who are relegated to it for life, like the traits that they've gained and used to succeed within it are inherent qualities and not earned skills, which I do like as a concept that they play around with in this movie.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Warner, I mean, not unsurprisingly, has it so much easier in the context of academia and law compared to Elle, but not just Elle, it's also Vivian and other women. And what you pointed out about his being able to move between the different spheres is very interesting, because the, so-called problem with Elle isn't the fact that she isn't intelligent, that she isn't capable. It's just that her particular skills or the contexts that she's applied them in are just not seen as valuable in society. And neither are her interests or her priorities. They're not seen as anything worthwhile. And so because of that, she has an especially difficult time moving between these spheres compared to someone like Warner or even Vivian, who has, I guess, assimilated better.
I agree. I do think there's something to the fact that they're both the respected versions of like the right role of a woman in their own context. Like, while Elle is meant to be a trophy wife, so is Vivian. Like in her world, that's what a trophy wife is. You know what I mean? The trophy wife needs to have this law degree, and Elle, like the version of law degree in Elle's world is maybe like a body that is kept shaved and blah 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 blah, which we do see in that opening sequence earlier. So like it's just like these different traits that are looked for in the trophy wife, the Jackie or Marilyn.
Yeah, you're right, because I'm sure Vivian would have a similarly difficult time if she moved to LA and tried to join Elle's sorority. There would be a different set of challenges. Although I do like that they portray this solidarity, this friendship among women, which again is often missing from stories that we see in mainstream media. It's very nice to see female characters, I mean, both in Elle's sorority and also outside, being supportive of each other and not competing, even if they have similar goals in life. They help each other, which is like normal life, except we don't usually see that in media.
For sure. But so, because of this breakup, Elle is wallowing.
Yeah.
And they get mani-pedis to feel better. And this is where Elle sees Warner's brother and his fiancée, the Vanderbilt, who are Yale law students, in a magazine. And she decides that she needs to be a law student to get Warner back, which is hilarious that that's her. That's her conclusion, which, to be fair, I'm sure there are nuances here that I don't understand that has to do with, like, the upper crust of their different, like, communities and stuff. Because these are specifically, it's not about just, like, East Coast, West Coast. It's, like, these rich white people of both sides.
Different flavors of rich. Yeah.
Right.
In a way, it could also hint at how naive Elle is. Although I'm inclined to think that she's not as naive as the narrative tries to portray her to be. To be honest, I am a little bit confused about her character. The scene preceding this was the breakup, and when Warner tells her that he wants to break up, the way she reacts was kind of interesting. Like, I couldn't tell if it was because of the way the actor was playing the character or if it was intentional, but Elle initially looked like she wasn't actually that upset and was more so playing it up to humiliate Warner in front of the other customers at the restaurant. And it was only as she was walking away from him that she looked genuinely upset. And so in the moments that she acts really naive, sometimes I'm confused as to whether she really is as clueless as she seems.
I think it's due to the comedic aspirations of the movie. They want this more, like, not slapstick, but, you know.
Right.
But yeah, I totally get you. I think it does muddy the waters because, like, I have similar problems, especially with the naivete. I'm like, Elle, you know better. Like, why are you acting like this? But also, it's like, I think we're just supposed to believe it, but, like, ugh.
Yeah. Because what confused me more was her admissions video that she makes for her application to Harvard, because there are these shots of her wearing like fancy dresses or in the pool, and it's like she's leveraging others' perception of her to her favor, because otherwise, I mean, I don't know, maybe it could be that she's leaning on the things that she knows are respected in her world or that are seen as impressive in her world. So that could be it, to be fair. Now I'm realizing as we've talked about it. But a part of me did wonder whether she was using how other people see her to her advantage, because she does have the skills to back up her application, but that's not the highlight of the video. It's very much centered around her appearance and her wealth. So again, I'm confused because it's like she knows and she's using it. And I think if that isn't the case, I think that would have been something interesting to explore. I think that would have been an interesting aspect of her character. But yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's that deep. Like, your take is so much more interesting. Yeah, I guess the closest way I could describe it is that she is leaning into the way people perceive her, but not in a smart way. Like, she also believes that of herself. Like, she believes these are her good qualities. And that, you know, like, she wants to portray, you know, her skills with memorization, but she's like, I'm gonna do it with style because that's my edge.
Right.
She just genuinely thinks that was a good move.
Yeah, that's a little boring. Throughout the movie, I couldn't help but wish that she had other traits to her character apart from just being nice and innocent and smart. Like, those are all pretty much positive qualities, but I want to see something negative in her. I want to see something interesting and a little bit more complex.
Yeah, same. I was so frustrated by how nice she was. Like, she was upset by the way she was treated and stuff, but it never made her jaded or mean or anything. And come on now.
Yeah. The one time she has a comeback, it's when people are being mean to her, and it's satisfying when she retaliates because it's finally like, okay, that was deserved. But she never does anything besides be nice otherwise. That's it. It's one note.
Her growth is one note. All she learns is like, I have value and I don't need Warner, instead of something more complex.
Yeah.
But so Elle guns it for Harvard Law. No one around her seems to understand what she wants or believe her suited for it, even her own parents. But, and this isn't a fresh take, this is definitely something I read from other people, but I really like how her friends don't understand it, but they're supportive anyway.
Yeah, it was a nice contrast, honestly, because everyone around her who was skeptical, it felt like was either kind of questioning her ability to do it, whereas her friends were just, it wasn't a reflection on her, but rather just confusion, But it's like, yeah, I mean, whatever you choose, I'll support you. But yeah, Elle takes the LSATs and she ends up passing them. And we also see, while she's celebrating, we also see the admissions board review her application and ultimately decide to accept.
But she goes to Harvard.
Yes. And is immediately hated by everybody. I was so confused about the hostility. It felt a little bit cartoonish. Like, I understand that many fields in society are male dominated and it's difficult for women and certain women to traverse those fields and be seen as belonging there. But the way they portrayed it here is just, I mean, I get it. Again, maybe it's the slapstick humor. I don't know. Maybe I just don't understand the movie's humor, but I was just confused.
Yeah, it is very exaggerated. To me, it's definitely a lot about like the inherent elitism of a place like Harvard Law.
The thing is, to me, this scene didn't successfully convey that. I didn't get any arrogance. I just got pure hostility. And I think they already do such a good job of conveying this very arrogance in the upcoming scenes where everyone's talking about their academic accomplishments. Then they all look down on Elle because they don't perceive her to be good enough to be there. And that already does the job. Whereas I think this scene just feels a bit too silly, and I think what might have been, in my opinion, a little bit more effective is if she had just been met with stone cold indifference. Because I think that already would have been a big enough contrast from the opening scene where there's so much warmth and friendship and love. The only thing anyone will pay attention to is your academic credentials. And if you don't have what they consider to be good enough credentials, then you're nothing. You're not worth their attention. I feel like that would have been maybe more realistic and also less cartoony.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, visually, I think already they've done a great job of showing Elle standing out because she's got this pink ensemble and it's very different to anything anyone else is wearing around her. And it does do a good job, you know, in a simple way of highlighting how limited a space there is for anybody, and maybe especially women, to express any sort of femininity in serious spheres if they want to be taken seriously. In that respect, I mean, I wouldn't say it's a strength of this scene in particular. I think it's a strength of the opening scene that we get this contrast here.
Yeah. But talking about outfits, her first day of class outfit is so cute. But she bumps into Warner, who is surprised to see her, and then she comes to class unprepared and gets kicked out, and then meets Emmett, who gives her some tips on her professors. One of Emmett's 2 scenes, maybe? Sorry, I'm so bitter about the lack of Emmett in this movie because I want it on the record. I am a huge fan of Legally Blonde the musical, and he is like a main character in that musical. And I haven't seen Legally Blonde in ages, and I forgot that he's like a very minor role in this movie.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't have complained about more Emmett in this movie.
I will say, the little bit we get of Emmett in this movie is like not great. Like, what is he even saying?
I also hadn't seen this movie in a really long time, and I remembered even less than I thought I would remember. So when you were describing how he's a good guy and everything, I was especially looking out for that.
Yeah, that's my fault.
When I finished the movie, I was just like, he's a normal guy. And because he's the only normal guy, it seems like he's a good guy because everyone else wants to kick Elle out of school. He's the only one reacting to her in a normal manner, which is to, you know, not judge her immediately and to just talk to her like she's a person. I love how the first time you mentioned him, right after that, you started complaining about him. We've barely given any context to his character, and already you were like, I hate him.
I don't hate him. I love him so much. His musical counterpart, that this one just, like, it's a disgrace. I'm like, you're giving Emmett a bad name, Luke Wilson. Anyway.
We can complain more when the time comes. We have another man to complain about now.
Yes, exactly. Warner shows up. And this is when Elle meets Vivian.
Yeah, she had a little encounter with her in class when Vivian supported the professor in kicking Elle out because she hadn't done the reading. So, not the best first impression on either of their parts. I mean, looking back and knowing how their relationship develops, I can kind of understand Vivian also being hostile towards Elle because from her view it's probably this person who is randomly sauntered in and doesn't care enough to even do the reading and isn't taking it seriously, and that confirms it. I suspected looking at her that she wouldn't take it seriously, and she's not. So I kind of understand her perspective, and things don't get better because Warner tells Elle that he's engaged to Vivian in the space of a month or something like that.
Yeah, over the summer. But so this is when we are concretely introduced to what a Jackie is like in the form of Vivian, someone who excels and follows the rules of this world, of the proper role of a woman and what makes one respectable, a certain look which conveys certain values and achievements and background. Vivian also mentions quote-unquote our club, which I can only assume is some kind of country club, a tangible physical institution for a select member of people who fulfill certain criteria, but also a closed social circle, which is what this movie's all about.
What I also like is how this movie sets up this conflict between the hypothetical Marilyn and Jackie and centers the man initially and makes us think that the problem between them is going to be that they're both fighting over him. But as the movie progresses, I really like how that evolves because we slowly start to see that neither of them remains particularly interested in Warner. The next time they're in class, Elle is sitting behind Vivian and Warner, and Vivian puts her hand on Warner's shoulder, and it looks like she's, showing off how much affection she has, but actually she's showing her the ring. And later on, there's also this scene where Vivian's friend comforts her by saying, "You're the one who has the ring." And so it's like, it's less about the man and more about the prestige of the ring. And I guess as an extension, the prestige they have in society, the validation they have from society, and how for each of them, the way they're perceived by society affects the validation that they have. And that's where the Jackie and Marilyn binary imposed upon them by society comes in. So I like that it's not just the typical story of two women fighting over a man. I mean, on the surface, it isn't because they ultimately realize he's trash, but also under the surface, he is, a stand-in for society, which is really interesting.
The thing they're fighting over is the role of Warner's wife, or the wife of someone like Warner,
Yeah.
It's what is most respectable in both their circles. But in this scene, she's also like kind of blending in a little and conforming because she's dressed in darker colors, dark gray actually. But she's also less precious and unfailingly kind. Her claws are coming out a little in class. She's a little more competitive. She's kind of playing by their rules, not in the, hostility, but in the academic excellence way. But because she's upset by this whole Vivian thing, she finds this hair and nail salon and meets Paulette, who is a nail technician, and Elle spills her guts. And Paulette tells her about her own romantic misfortunes. And I think this is a really interesting layer in the narrative with where it goes and just Elle's growth as a whole, because Paulette is talking about being discarded by her ex to whom she had presumably attached a lot of her value to. I mean, along with actual physical assets, that is. But I think that's a really fitting foil to Elle, and especially with it being introduced at this point of the story. Especially with Paulette's remark of, it happens to everybody, or it happens all the time, something to that effect. Because it does. So many women's well-beings are tied to men, be it husbands or whoever else, when they quote-unquote play by the rules and fulfill these solely supportive roles of Warner's Marilyn or Jackie, basically everything we've just talked about. But yeah, I really like how Paulette kind of embodies that conflict and that concept that Elle is discovering might not be, right. It doesn't have to be like her future.
That's a really great point. It's really interesting to think of Paulette as Elle's foil and potentially a cautionary tale, though I like that the movie doesn't treat her as any lesser because of it. I like that Elle and Paulette can openly discuss their situations with each other, and they don't dismiss each other's problems because one is perceived to be more serious or more worthy of attention than the other. And once again, I think the movie does a really great job of portraying not just positive but also these meaningful and very realistic relationships between the characters. And it doesn't hurt that they're also female because, like I've already mentioned too many times, there's a lack of that in media. And I like also that as foils of each other, they both find fulfillment in different ways. And it's a rejection of the idea that women can only be valuable if they pursue this one particular, very strict path.
Yeah. This conversation between them does lead to Paula telling Elle to steal the bastard back. And that's what drives Elle to, be more ambitious in class and everything. But even with all of this, she is still rejected by her peers, including Vivian's study group and the other students that make up her graduating class.
I'm not sure why Elle wants to be... Well, I guess now I am. Before I wasn't sure why she wanted to be with him, but if he's a stand-in for society's validation, then I understand. But that being said, I understand Elle wanting Warner's validation as like a stand-in for society's validation, but setting that aside, just looking at both of them as characters, I didn't think that they had an interesting relationship, and I wasn't convinced by Elle being so determined to win Warner back. Like, their relationship felt very half-baked to me, and it felt like they were trying to convince us of how much Elle loves him just by having her say she loves him, but I didn't see it enough. As if applying to Harvard Law isn't enough. But I'm like, why? Why do you love him? I want to know.
The only answer I can come up with is like, he's supposedly this big shot when they were in their circles back in COLA or whatever. So, he's the best guy or whatever for her to snatch.
Yeah, maybe if he'd been Homecoming King, then I would have understood.
You're right, we never see that sash up on his wall.
Yeah.
But since we're on the subject of her not friends, let's talk about her friends. Because Elle catches up with them on the phone, and they're doing well and achieving these milestones that are deemed valuable in their world. Meanwhile, Elle is far removed from it and not exactly succeeding in this new life she's entered. And we can see how that gets to her by the fact that she puts up a front and lies to her friends about how well things are going. Like, she kind of starts telling them how not well it's going, but she does lie about how well the, Operation Get Warner Back is going.
I think that's definitely a very real thing, the feeling of missing out on these milestones that you're supposed to achieve by a certain time in your life and seeing your peers achieve them. I guess I'm saying that while Elle is in law school studying to become a lawyer, which is some people's aspired to milestone that maybe they don't have the chance to pursue. So just saying that while acknowledging the amount of privilege that Elle has just goes to show that the expectations are different, I guess, depending on the context. Like, in Elle's world, this is very much a detour and not what she's meant to be doing.
Yeah, but Elle is, in a roundabout way, invited to a quote-unquote costume party by Vivian, but it isn't one. And she shows up in this bunny costume. And I don't know if this is something I like per se, because it's not like I would have hated it if it was the opposite. But I guess I enjoyed the fact that Elle isn't so much embarrassed than she is mad and annoyed. She's like so over it. So that was something that I had fun with. I guess maybe it is the fact that because she was so nice this whole time, it was just refreshing to see her be mad.
Yeah. I agree. I do like that aspect of her character, that she's so confident in her sense of self. She's so unshakable that she doesn't get embarrassed because she knows she looks nice.
Yeah.
Like she sticks out, but she already does in school anyway. So it's not that big of a deal, but it's more like an annoyance than it is a humiliation. And that is really interesting. And it is really nice to see in a female character. And I guess it's all the more powerful that ultimately what does start to shake her sense of self more is not people being mean towards her. It's more, as she becomes more invested, she does start to dress very differently, and it does feel like her true sense of self takes a back burner for a while. So even when people couldn't bully her into it, that's what does it. It's this very thing that she ultimately finds herself interested in and liking, contrary to what she would have believed.
Yeah. But actually, one thing does get to her here, because Elle and Warner talk about Callahan's internship, one of their professors, and Warner says Elle would never get the grades for it, that she isn't smart enough. And may I add, a very condescending tone. And I fucking love this scene and the acting on Reese Witherspoon's part. You can see the heartbreak on her face, and we see her genuinely emotionally hurt so rarely in this movie, especially so far, that it really just lands. She looks like she's on the verge of tears, and it's just so incredibly well done.
Yeah, you're right. It feels like the first emotional beat, and I like that the movie takes the time to linger on it. We get this very drawn out shot of Elle's face, and even when Warner's speaking, we don't see him, we see her reaction to his words, and you can very clearly see the realization dawning on her face that she's been pursuing a lost cause in Warner, that he's never going to see her as his equal. And I mean, I was complaining about the breakup scene before, but I guess part of what makes this scene so impactful is that it is the first time Elle seems genuinely, truly hurt. And maybe it would have watered down that impact a bit if the breakup scene had been similarly emotional rather than comedic. So I guess I'll give the movie that, even though I don't understand its sense of humor that much.
Well, in the first scene, I think part of it is also we're supposed to get to know her as this like dramatic blah 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 person.
Yeah.
And then the movie slowly humanizes her and like shows us these new layers to her.
Yeah.
But yeah, the part where she finds herself arguing with him about her intellect, and you can hear it in her voice that she realizes how futile it is, because I feel like it's a conversation or argument that most women have had where some guy says the most insane shit like this, basically. But even as you're saying, like, took the same exams, we blah, 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 you already know that none of it is gonna matter. Like, there's a lack of conviction in her voice where she already knows she's lost, you know? Where she's more talking to herself than she is to Warner. That really gets me in the scene, and it's so well done. I love it.
Yeah.
But yes, this encounter kind of lights a fire under her, and she's hell-bent on proving herself here on out. Which leads to a studying montage.
Yes, another montage.
This montage concludes in Elle helping Paulette confront her ex and getting her dog back, which, in the context of what I said earlier about Paulette's character and her subplot, is very fitting for this point in the narrative, because they're both taking control of their lives and kind of sticking it to the man, you know, or not the man. A man. Yeah. Especially in the next scene, when she outsmarts Warner on a case they're discussing in class.
Yeah. Right before we move on, in the scene with Paulette, I really like that it's, again, similar to the scene in the beginning when she's dress shopping, and also the climax. She does it again where she leverages her knowledge to her benefit, and not just her knowledge, but she leverages the lack of the other person's knowledge to their detriment, which I really like.
Yes.
And it's just so nice to see her be able to apply the things that she's learned, maybe not in the most natural fashion just yet, but I really like that we get this as a sort of bridge between her starting to take an interest in law and actually becoming proficient in law.
Same, totally. In class, actually, Ella's doing so well that Callahan invites her to apply to his internship, and she does with a scented resume.
Yeah. it almost makes me want to have experienced the days before email so that we could all trade scented resumes. I feel like that would be fun.
So would I. I've heard the job market was a little less tough back then.
And a lot more fragrant.
Yeah. But you know what? The fragrance must have worked because she gets an internship.
Yeah.
And the case they're working on turns out to be the defense for Brooke Wyndham, a former member of Elle's sorority.
They all meet up before they meet with Brooke. And in this scene, Vivian and Elle are suddenly more civil towards each other, which I feel like I missed what the turning point was. To me, it would make more sense if this tentative truce between them materialized after Vivian realizes what an asshole Warner is, because there's this very pointed look that she gives him at one point when they're all working together, and you can tell that's when things change and the veneer finally wears off, and I mean, you can tell that she's over it. And at that point, Vivian would also already have seen Elle in action and seen how nice Elle is, to put it kind of simply, but how much integrity she has, and the fact that she's taking, the law course and also this murder case very seriously. And so it would have made sense that Vivian then understands that she misunderstood Elle and maybe gain some more respect for her. But they are nice to each other already, a little bit at least.
I think I just didn't really read this as them being nice to each other. I thought this was them being really awkward.
Well, awkward is still not mean.
To me, Vivian isn't particularly nice to her because Elle is Elle. So she's like, you look nice today, Vivian. And Vivian's just like, thanks. And I was like, you're welcome. And then later on, like when they're discussing the case and stuff, you can still see Vivian like making faces at her. Like Elle says something quote unquote dumb and Vivian's like laughing at her and things. So I didn't really see this scene as her being nice, but yeah, she's not as hostile. I mean, I also think it's the setting, like, it's not the place for her to be mean to her.
Yeah, fair. Yeah, because the last time they spoke, Elle called Vivian a bitch, so I was expecting more, like, eye-poking.
I love that line so much. It was so good. With how nice Elle is, you don't expect it of her. And even in that scene, you don't really see it coming. And her delivery was so good. Anyway, that was such a good line.
Yeah, it was nice to see her do that. I wish we had more of that. So I guess I want more eye-poking and name-calling.
Yeah.
So the lawyers meet with Brooke, who is being accused of having murdered her husband, and Callahan interrogates her, and it's very clear that he doesn't believe she's innocent, and they have a brief conversation where Brooke basically refuses to give her alibi. And as they're leaving, Brooke recognizes Elle as a member of her sorority, and she basically compliments Elle and says, it's nice that at least someone on the team has a brain.
Yeah.
And I guess it's related to what we were talking about before, like how certain things are valuable in certain contexts. And to Brooke, it's more valuable to have someone like Elle on the team, whereas everything that Elle represents is seen as, not good enough to the rest of the group. And it's satisfying that ultimately that is what ends up being Elle's strength, the things that her peers look down on her for.
Yeah. And the way that they don't really treat Brooke's claims and convictions and desires seriously parallels well to how no one took Elle seriously. And yeah, this is like the flip side of that, because now Brooke is like treating Elle seriously because of those aspects. The fact that she speaks Brooke's language so that she understands what Brooke values and everything.
And I guess their similar perspectives are what enable them to connect on a human level. Like, Elle looks at Brooke as a person rather than a suspect that's been written off. She values her as a person enough to keep her alibi secret and respect Brooke's wishes. And it's that kindness that is missing from the rest of the characters because they don't see people like Brooke and Elle as people.
And it's also not just the lack of humanity in a suspect, it's of someone who looks like Brooke and leads the kind of life that Brooke does, because it's not like Callahan would be, I mean, I think he would because he's an asshole, but he would take, say, a well-to-do male CEO billionaire who's, about to be convicted for murder, their desires to keep their alibi or whatever, like their desires more seriously, because he sees them as human and thinks that they have like the judgment or whatever to know what's good for them and things, whereas they see Brooke as someone who's shallow and vapid or whatever, and her reason must be stupid.
Someone immediately questioned if she was a gold digger when they started discussing her case. It's like they don't see the person, they only see the stereotypes.
Yeah, we do get the scene of Elle and Paulette at the salon, and Elle, in an effort to help Paulette flirt with the male guy, teaches her the band and snap. That's cute.
All the women join in once Elle and Paulette get started, and it felt a little bit cliche, but it was nice to see a space where women are free to dance in synchronicity.
Express themselves,
yes. I don't know, there's something cozy about it being a salon. Like, it feels like a very
communal.
Yeah, that's a good word. Yeah, it's a nice contrast to the prison, first of all, where Brooke is, but also the spaces that the lawyers and the law students occupy. It's less clinical, it's less exclusionary. It's like a faint reflection of the sorority house, a space where everybody's equal.
Yeah, mostly we get to see more of Elle working on the case, and Callahan is treating Vivian like a waitress, the asshole. But Elle visits Brooke and gets the alibi from her, and it turns out she was getting liposuction, which makes her a fraud because she has a fitness empire. Again, I really like how Elle takes Brooke seriously, which I've already said, but I really like that she understands not only the severity of this getting out, but also the value of Brooke's quote-unquote reputation to someone like her. She knows the values held by the community that Brooke and she herself is part of, so she keeps Brooke's secret and refuses to tell Callahan the alibi.
I think this is a great way of showing Elle's integrity, because as she's been taking her degree more seriously, we have seen her assimilate a little bit more and try to be more serious and fit in better, but we know that there are certain limits that she's not going to cross. And this is a more interesting way to show how nice she is, or how much of a good person she is, because it also serves as a direct contrast to the way the other lawyers treat Brooke and the way they needle her into divulging what the alibi is. Especially Warner, who encourages her to forget about Brooke and tell everybody, because that will help her further her career. Just keeps on getting better, that guy.
Yeah, and we see Vivian overhear this and her disgust at his behavior. But yeah, it just reveals Warner's lack of integrity, that he would sell out somebody to help himself get ahead.
Yeah, and when Elle tells him that she promised, he's like, who cares? And I like that that could also apply to the way that he treats his partner. Like, it makes sense why Vivian would be disgusted, not just as a lawyer, but also as a human and as his partner. She realizes that it could very easily be her that he treats like that. It's so refreshing to see that a shitty guy is treated like a shitty guy by the other characters. He's not idealized just because he's supposed to be the prize, so he's gonna be the prize no matter how he behaves. Like, I'm so glad that Vivian is disgusted by him and doesn't excuse his behavior.
I think I might hate on Emmett a little bit here.
Yeah, go for it.
When you said that, I'm like, you know what? You are so right. Because they kind of treat Emmett like that in the, he's the prize. I mean, he kind of is Elle's prize, so he gets off scot-free. And I don't think he's free of guilt of his role in this whole fucked up thing. Like, Callahan treating Vivian like a waitress. Emmett was there the whole time. Like, we understand Warner is a dick. Obviously, he wouldn't bat an eye. We can assume that the other associates are also dicks because they also, cajole Elle into divulging the alibi in very devious ways. Like they say some bullshit while they're doing that, so we understand that they're also dickheads. But Emmett is not that way. Emmett is supposed to be the good guy, and even when, he's trying to explain to Elle how important this alibi is, he never says anything bad. But he is guilty of being part of the problem, I guess. And I'm not saying even like just because he's part of this team, because he's a lawyer. Like, I understand that it's his job, but like he also didn't bat an eye when Callahan treated Vivian the way that he did. And that was never really addressed. Going so far as to say the movie goes out of its way to paint Emmett as the lone good guy, the exception. It just bugged me because I'd forgotten the whole subplot about Callahan and Vivian, and this time around watching it, I was like, that is so fucked up. And I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm an adult now and I've been in those like environments and whatever, so I'm more like attuned to it, but it's not a small thing. And so yeah, it really bugged me that Emmett is the lone good guy and he was in those rooms and we're not supposed to question that whole thing.
That's a really great point. And not just the fact that he was in those rooms, but the fact that he works for Callahan. And so he must know. He must know to some degree how much of a bad person he is, because he directly works under him. And I mean, he's just a silent spectator. It's supposed to be enough, I guess, that he gives Elle the benefit of the doubt. But yeah, I mean, forget speaking up for her. He never speaks up against any of the heinous behaviors that we see. So I think, again, it's just he's, in comparison to the others, he's not as bad, so he's supposed to be seen as good.
Yeah. I think it's that, like, I can kind of overlook the fact that he specifically works for Callahan.
I guess you can't choose your bosses.
But I don't know, like, we do see him make a choice when he listens to Elle during the trial and uses the information she gives to him to question the pool boy. So I think we are supposed to think like, oh, he always finds a way to somehow work around this and try to do the right thing. But I think they kind of just forgot about the Callahan-Vivian thing, which is what bugs me, I guess. Because, I don't know, I think it's just egregious to me that this was treated as a small thing. But talking about Emmett, he and Elle go to interview the dead guy's ex-wife at a spa. And they have a cute moment in the car where Elle calls him a butthead.
Yeah, rightfully so.
Is it rightfully so?
Well, he's also kind of following in Callahan's footsteps, and he doesn't feel inclined to believe that Brooke might be innocent. But Elle tells him to, keep an open mind and people might surprise him, which to me, at least, the way I read it, was what prompted him later to trust Elle in the courtroom where he's playing what she told him.
I think his reasoning is more reasonable.
Yeah. I mean, it's not just because she's a blonde woman, for sure.
Yeah. Because he's picking up on her dishonesty, which is there. It's just for the wrong thing. And Elle says so.
Yeah, that's fair.
To me, it was refreshing and or interesting to also see this take on quote-unquote non-believing Brooke from just a normal guy, like a normal take about it.
Yeah, I mean, the things that Elle said weren't necessarily always logical either. The way she was insisting on Brooke's innocence. But so yeah, I mean, I guess in this case, Emmett represents the more logical point of view.
I wish the scene had been longer. I just realized after watching this movie, I don't know why they're together. There's no reason for them to be together except like he's hot. We don't really see a relationship between them grow. Like he respects her as a human, not as a romantic partner, or like there's no like romantic interest.
Basic human decency is all we can expect.
Yeah, I mean it's hard enough to find.
Yeah, don't have such high standards.
But this is where the ex-wife suggests that Brooke and the pool boy had an affair. But they take a little break from the case. I mean, not really a break because Vivian comes over to pick up deposition files from Elle. And they have a little bonding moment. And Vivian praises Elle for keeping her word to Brooke. And I just love the scene so much. Vivian is just so vulnerable and it's portrayed so fucking well. Her attempts at having a civil conversation with Elle and establishing a friendly relationship is so stilted and genuine. I just adore it. Also, love how her progress is not only reflected in the portrayal and her delivery, but also her advancing closer and closer to Elle in her room, from the doorway to the end of her bed to right in front of Elle's chair. And it's just so well done.
Yeah, I really like this scene too. It feels feels like a real genuine moment. And it's nice to see, these two characters who have essentially been pitted against each other by external forces finally realize that a lot of the challenges they're facing are the same. They're from the same source. And the dialogue and everything feels very natural the way that this scene goes. And I love that at the end, the peak of them sort of forming this friendship is the fact that Elle hands her dog over to Vivian and the dog immediately likes her, and it's very sweet.
I think there's something to the fact that she starts, changing her mind about things once she kind of enters the workforce in a way. Because, well, yes, this is fueled by her realizing that Warner is trash. I think there's something to the fact that she's realizing when you're in the real world, it's counterproductive to, fight with Elle or someone like Elle or whatever, because there are bigger problems like Callahan treating her the way that he does,
And murder.
And murder.
Yeah, for sure.
But we start Brooke Wyndham's trial. The pool boy takes a stand and claims that he and Brooke had an affair. And Elle realizes that he's actually gay and so can't have had an affair with Brooke. And it's Emmett believing her that leads to the pool boy accidentally admitting that he has a boyfriend.
It's after all of this that Professor Callahan calls Elle to his office and under the guise of complimenting her, makes a move on her, and Vivian accidentally sees them talking and misunderstands, thinking that it's mutual. It's ridiculous how they constantly have Callahan talk about what makes a good lawyer and what makes a great lawyer, even though he's actually pretty ineffective as a lawyer, as we see. Like, he can't even help Brooke. And the fact that he implies that, accepting his advances is the only way Elle will ever become a lawyer is even more ridiculous. Like, just go away. But yeah, Vivian confronts Elle after she leaves Callahan's office. And there's this shot where Elle is in the elevator and the doors close and she's left staring at her reflection on the doors. And I really like that part because it's like she's finally facing herself. And I mean, not to imply that Callahan hitting on her is in any way her fault, but I think to some degree, maybe she's confronting her naivete because while I don't think that it was naive of her to believe that she could be successful in law school or for her to believe that her professor actually valued her for her skills and not for her appearance, I do think that she was naive in terms of not really thinking about the challenges that she would have to face in this completely new sphere. And I mean, I don't blame her. How can she know? But I guess it's like, in a way, it's a lesson that everybody's forced to learn at some point in life that, being kind and being nice isn't the end all be all. Like, people are going to take advantage of you. People are going to, be awful. And I like that shot where Elle faces herself and kind of takes stock of what happened.
Yeah, that's a great point because this is the moment where she's facing her own self-worth because this is hitting her especially hard because being accepted into this internship was the first time she had tangible proof of her worth in this world.
Yeah.
So this is the first time that she's reevaluating that and her confronting the fact that that has been reframed and she's very upset and decides to quit.
Yeah, and even before she joined law school, she had also never really doubted in her ability to succeed. She had always, I think, assumed that she would be just fine. And so this is the first instance where I guess it hits her in the face that not everybody has even been paying attention to her skills.
While Vivian gets the wrong idea, Emmett, thankfully, believes her when she tells him what happened. Despite his encouragement, Elle still decides to leave. And she's saying goodbye to Paulette at the salon when one of her professors turns out to be there and gives her a pep talk. And I really love her role here because she's someone who has thrived in this world and is very respected. And Elle sees her here in what's essentially her safe space, somewhere she's come to think of as a place filled with like-minded people and people like her. So seeing her professor exist in these two worlds, that separation and binary had always been false, works so well in Elle's breakthrough and growth.
That's an amazing observation. I didn't catch that at all. Yeah, now that you mention it, seeing the professor there draws this parallel between her and Elle, and you can almost imagine her being in a similar situation to Elle. She's blonde too.
She is.
Earlier in life, and it's yet another foil to Elle alongside, Paulette and Vivian, yet another woman who is occupying space in the world. I mean, she rightfully should, but occupying these spaces that society has deemed contradictory. And it's, I guess, yet another example of a perfectly valid choice for a woman to make. It's really nice to see that Elle has all of these really great examples around her of women who are succeeding in different aspects in life and are content with themselves.
Yeah, but Emmett basically tells Brooke and Vivian what happened, which leads to Brooke firing Callahan and hiring Elle to represent her with Emmett supervising. And this gets off to a rocky start, but Elle uses her extensive knowledge, just as she did with the pool boy, to catch the stepdaughter in a lie and gets the case dismissed.
Yeah.
An iconic scene, once again.
An amazing scene. I love the build-up so much. Through the repetition in Elle's dialogue, you can really see the gears churning in her head as she tries to think through everything. And, I love the moment where it all clicks and she realizes that she has the culprit.
I love the scene.
It's a great conclusion to Elle's journey.
What's even better, though, is that Warner chases after her again, and she shuts him down with the best line delivery ever. Listen, this actor does a good job the whole movie, but when Elle shuts Warner down in this scene, there's something to the way she delivers the line that's so, there's so little build-up to it, and you can't tell that she's putting on an act right before it, and there's a crispness and a swiftness in the delivery that makes it so fucking good and so satisfying, and it's so good.
Yeah, the way that she initially pretends like she's giving him the time of day kind of reminds me of the way he broke up with her because, he took her out on this romantic dinner.
Called her fucking Pooh Bear.
Yeah, and complimented her looks, and he acted like he was going to propose. He pulled this 180 for no reason instead of just being straight with her from the beginning. And it feels like she kind of gets back at him that way here, and she basically throws back in his face what he told her about his career aspirations and how she doesn't fit into them. That's what she gets to tell him now, and it's so satisfying, and I love it.
Yeah. It must be for her too, because she immediately ascends into what I can only assume is heaven. Because she goes through these double doors into just white nothingness.
The light. I guess her graduation must be taking place there too.
Yeah.
Because next thing we know, it's 2 years later.
Yep, and she is the class-elected speaker. Good for her.
Yep, things are going well for everybody except Warner, pretty much.
Yeah.
I guess that leads nicely into our absurd conclusions. The first one is that everybody's dead.
Oh my god. I don't know how Warner got into heaven, though.
Oh, he's just visiting for the graduation.
Ah.
He'll descend afterwards.
My absurd conclusion is that Emmett is kind of dumb because there's this scene after they go to the spa place where they're talking about her being blonde or something.
Oh my god.
And it's not an offensive scene or whatever. It's a whatever scene and it's a passing scene, but it's also Emmett, you have 5 lines in this movie and 3 of them is nonsense. What the fuck are they talking about? The rest of this movie, even with how tongue-in-cheek it's been and how funny and they do play around with the whole blonde thing, however ridiculous it is. In this scene, they it's too genuine.
It's too serious.
Or something, yeah, too serious. I'm what are you guys talking about?
See, it's so funny that this is your absurd conclusion because this is one very real gripe I have with the movie. The fact that they paint being blonde as like this hurdle in life. They paint blondes as this discriminated against minority. And I think that's a result of this scene. I don't think the rest of the movie is this serious, but in this scene, it feels like they are conflating the issue they're tackling of how quick people are to judge a woman on her appearance. They conflate it with being blonde. It's absurd because it's not like anybody else is exempt from the same kind of judgment.
Yeah, it's like the rest of the movie is using blonde as like a stand-in, right? It's like an embodiment of the heights of femininity. We understand what it stands for. But in this scene, they just talk about it literally, in a very literal sense. And I don't know, it's so weird. The scene is so weird. It makes me think that Emmett is weird. Emmett is weird.
I agree. This scene was weird. And since it's Emmett's
only scene,
the only scene she and Emmett interact for any extended period of time, that makes him weird too. Yeah.
I don't know why, but all of Emmett's lines sound really weird to me. Like they're ADR'd in, like in the same tone every time, like with the same inflection. So I guess my other absurd conclusion is Emmett is actually just like a Ken doll that they pull the string on and he says his lines. But yeah. Anyway, now that we've discussed this movie in excruciating detail, have your opinions changed? Would you recommend this movie?
I didn't remember this movie well at all, but revisiting it, I did very much enjoy it. I think it's a great time, like the critics keep insisting, but I think it's not as fluffy as they seem to want to pretend that it is. Like, it does have substance. I mean, something can be fluffy and still have substance, and I think this movie manages that balance pretty well. I mean, I posed a question in the beginning about whether it had inherent merit or whether it's just easily palatable, and I don't know that it breaks a bunch of boundaries in terms of the subject matter, and like, I'm questioning why this movie is so beloved compared to other movies that are just as good, that are very similar in subject matter and execution, but those are seen as not good movies. And I guess the conclusion that I come to is that it is a fun movie and it does have something to say, but ultimately it doesn't challenge anything. It doesn't necessarily do anything new. And I think that's especially noticeable in characters like Emmett and how underdeveloped his character is in terms of, you know, responding to everything that's going on around him and how we're supposed to view him as a good guy just because he's not a shitty guy. And yeah, while it does reframe certain aspects of femininity and womanhood in a positive light, and it does give us very fleshed out and human female characters, I think there are some parts that maybe leave you wanting more. But that being said, it is still a great movie, and I would definitely recommend that people watch it. I guess I just want justice for the Clique and Bratz and Barbie. They don't have Reese Witherspoon in them, but they're still good.
I think Emma is a nothing contention.
You just complained about him for 15 minutes.
Yeah, because I hate him, but he's such a tiny character.
He's supposed to be the main lead, and the fact that he is complacent and
is
quiet,
he the main
kind
lead?
of,
I guess that's my point.
they end up together ultimately.
To me, he's such a tiny character, and I think that's like that could be a weakness of the movie, that he is so useful in some points of the story, but they don't make him into a real character, that he becomes like such a perfunctory tool for them to get things to happen. But I think this movie does a really good job of navigating this world where women are judged so harshly one way or the other without actually judging them. Yeah, I think it's just rare to see that in 2001, no less. Because we talked about A Cinderella Story. We talked about how femininity is demonized in that movie. And I mean, we talk about it in other movies as well from the early 2000s a lot of the time. So that in itself, I think, helps this movie stand out given when it came out. But I am really impressed by how well it holds up now. The concept and the conflict they're tackling hasn't aged or anything. And the question of women's role in society, and especially in these specific circles, like to me, feels ridiculous and archaic, but I also understand that I am not in those circles, and I do know that these are not necessarily as outdated as they should be in circles like it. So it's a really interesting take on that, which is actually something that I had totally forgotten about this movie. Like, I just remembered it as being, blonde girl can be smart. But that's not really what it's saying. So that was really a surprise to me because I haven't seen it in a really long time. So I do recommend this movie, and it is really fun. However, I recommend the musical more. Okay? The musical is better.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you said. I think definitely from a thematic point of view, it is very groundbreaking and still holds up in all of its messages. It's just, I guess, from a storytelling point of view, from an execution point of view, it's kind of just like, yeah, it's good. But I think Barbie as the Princess and the Pauper is better.
Well, that's just a whole different league, Sohini.
Yeah, sorry, I might as well have compared it to Citizen Kane.
Yeah. So that's all for our episode on Legally Blonde. If you have any suggestions for movies we should discuss on the podcast, send them in at graveyard_slot on Instagram, the Graveyard Slot Podcast on Tumblr, or email us at thegraveyardslot@gmail.com.
If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of The Graveyard Slot.